Millionaire pretended to sleep to test the Maid's twins, but what they did left him in tears. Victor Hale no longer placed his trust in anyone, not because he was arrogant, but because trust had once cost him far too much. There was a time when he believed in people with almost naive sincerity. He believed in promises. He believed in loyalty. He believed that if he lived with decency, the world would respond in kind. He had once loved. That woman was not only Victor's fiancée, but also his closest business partner. Together, they built the company from nothing, spending countless sleepless nights on projects, dreaming of a future where success and happiness walked side by side. Victor gave her not only his heart, but also control and his absolute trust. And that was precisely what destroyed him. At the busiest point of Victor's life, when the company was at its peak, the woman he trusted most betrayed him. She sold internal information to competitors, withdrew money from their joint accounts, and signed agreements behind his back. By the time Victor realized what was happening, everything had already collapsed. The company lost half its value in just a few weeks. His fiancée vanished with the money, leaving behind nothing but a short, cold email as an explanation. From that day on, Victor no longer saw the world the same way. The betrayal of that year did not just take a person from him, it shattered his ability to trust. From then on, Victor learned to live closed off, building invisible but razor-sharp boundaries, enough to keep everyone at a safe distance. His house reflected this perfectly. Spotless to the point of coldness, orderly to the point of lifelessness, a place preserved, not lived in. A knock echoed through the room, precise, neither too early nor too late. Richard Moore stepped inside, tall and slender, his dark suit impeccably pressed. He always carried himself as if he had been programmed for the role of control. "There's a matter that requires a decision," Richard said, his voice even. Victor didn't turn around. "If it's not urgent, leave it for later." "It concerns the woman who was just hired for the cleaning staff." Victor's hand paused on the keyboard. "Is there a problem with her?" "No," Richard replied. "It's just a special circumstance. Her name is Emma Collins, a widow, twin sons, 6 years old." A long silence followed. Victor turned his chair, his gaze turning cold. "Why are you telling me this?" "She has no child care," Richard said. "Her condition is that she be allowed to bring the 2 children with her." He paused, then added, "Her work record is excellent, and she needs this job more than anything." Victor stood up and walked toward the glass wall. Children, noise, movement, things he had removed from his life long ago. He hated intrusion, hated the feeling of losing control over his space. But there was one thing he couldn't deny: desperation. He recognized it instantly, because he had once been there himself. "Set clear rules," Victor said, his voice low but decisive. "No running around, no familiarity, no turning this house into a family living space. She works, gets paid, and keeps her distance." "Yes, sir," Richard replied. 3 days after his brief conversation with Richard, Victor Hale heard the doorbell ring through the mansion, a sound so rare it felt out of place, like a wrong note in a composition of silence. Victor was in his office. He did not stand. He merely turned his head slightly and looked through the thick glass toward the front gate. A woman stood there, slender, with brown hair neatly tied back. Her clothes were simple, not new but clean. A large bag rested on her shoulder. 2 young boys stood beside her, each holding one of her hands. It was Emma Collins. Richard opened the door with his usual practiced politeness. Victor could not hear their conversation, but he watched carefully. Emma stepped inside with her back straight and her gaze steady. No hesitation, no submissiveness. Just a woman who knew she was there to work. The twin boys followed closely behind. Same height, same hair color. yet not as identical as Victor had expected. One looked around eagerly, eyes lighting up at the vastness of the space, unable to hide his curiosity. The other walked more slowly, observing in silence, his gaze deep and cautious, as if he were reading the house itself. "They're Noah and Lucas," Richard had said earlier. 6 years old. Twins. The morning passed quietly until an off-rhythm sound echoed through the hallway. Laughter. Victor sprang to his feet. The door to his study opened sharply. 2 boys were running in circles through the corridor, their footsteps pounding against the wooden floor. Lucas was the instigator, his face flushed with excitement. Noah followed behind, slower, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Emma appeared almost immediately. She didn't raise her voice, just one sentence, low and firm. "Stop." Both children froze. Lucas lowered his head, lips pressed tightly together. "I forgot," the boy said softly. Noah said nothing. He looked up and stared straight at Victor. That gaze made him uncomfortable in a strangely unfamiliar way, as if the child were seeing something behind the cold shell Victor had worked so hard to build. Emma turned when she realized Victor was standing there. "I'm sorry, sir. We'll keep things quiet," she said briefly. No pleading, no excuses. Victor didn't reply. He turned his back and closed the door. But the image of Noah's eyes stayed with him longer than he was willing to admit. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm. Subtle, quiet, yet impossible to deny. Victor Hale continued working in his office as he always had. Reports were reviewed. Calls were made. On the surface, nothing appeared different, but the mansion itself had begun to change. Some mornings, Victor stepped out of his office and noticed a faint scent lingering in the air. Not the lifeless smell of machine-made coffee he was used to, but the warmth of toasted bread, eggs, the unmistakable aroma of a real breakfast. He frowned, irritated, yet never summoned anyone to complain. Occasionally, soft laughter echoed through the hallway, quickly silenced. Emma kept her word. She corrected her children in a low, firm voice. Lucas was restless by nature, quick to forget, but one look from his mother was enough to stop him. Noah was different. He rarely made noise at all. He sat quietly, drawing or reading, as if he instinctively understood the invisible boundaries of the house. Victor began noticing the smallest details. A toy car left near the back door, a book placed on the kitchen table that he did not recall seeing before. And one morning, when he came down earlier than usual, Victor noticed a piece of paper lying quietly on the table. It was a drawing. Clumsy colored strokes formed a large yellow sun in the corner of the page. Beneath it stood a small figure, alone. No smile. At the bottom, written in a child's shaky handwriting, were a few simple words. "For the sad man." Victor picked up the paper. He stood there for a long moment, reading the words again and again, as if they did not belong in his world. No one had ever called him sad. People called him cold, distant, intimidating, not sad. He folded the paper, crumpled it, and threw it into the trash. The movement was sharp, decisive, just as he always treated things he deemed unnecessary. Yet that night, when the mansion had fallen completely silent, Victor returned to the kitchen. He opened the trash bin, retrieved the crumpled paper, slowly smoothed it out, and carried it back to his office. He placed it inside his desk drawer. Richard had seen everything. "Perhaps this wasn't a wise decision," he said the following day. "What do you mean?" Victor asked without looking up. "Children bring disruption, the very thing you've always avoided." Victor stopped writing. "I'm the one who decides what disturbs me." Richard fell silent, but the dissatisfaction in his eyes was impossible to hide. Victor returned to his familiar armchair. The house was quiet again. Only one thing had changed. The silence was no longer empty. It was heavy, as if something were waiting to be named. That Sunday morning, the two boys seemed more restless than usual. "It's so big here," Lucas whispered, his eyes lighting up as he looked past the iron fence. "Don't look anymore," Emma replied, her voice gentle but firm. "Today, you both stay close to me." Lucas seemed like he wanted to say something else, but only shrugged. Noah didn't interrupt. The boy observed. Emma had only just turned away when a familiar instinct pulled her back. Lucas was not the kind of child who could sit still for long. And sure enough, quick footsteps echoed. Emma turned and saw Lucas heading toward the glass garden inside. "Lucas!" The boy stopped, his eyes fixed on the tall trees. "I'm just looking." Noah appeared behind him, slower. "There's something that looks like stone statues," he said quietly. Emma dropped the cleaning cloth. Her heart tightened. "What did I say?" Lucas lowered his head. "We have to stay close to you." "Then come back, right now." A low voice sounded behind her, calm but enough to shift the air. "Is something wrong?" Emma turned. Victor Hale stood at the entrance to the garden, arms crossed, his gaze as cold as the glass wall behind him. "We'll leave immediately," Emma said quickly. "This is my fault." Victor didn't answer. He looked at the two children. Lucas avoided his eyes. Noah did not. "Why do you never smile?" Noah said, not as a question, but as an observation. Emma felt the blood drain from her body. "Noah," she said urgently, "you don't—" Victor remained still. His gaze held the boy a moment longer than necessary. Then he turned away, without saying a word. Emma gripped her son's hands tighter than usual. "I told you not to say things like that." Lucas sniffled softly. "I'm sorry, Mom." Noah nodded, silent. Emma returned to her work, but her hands trembled slightly. She needed this job. There was no backup plan, no room for mistakes. Richard appeared in the hallway as if he had been waiting. "Things don't seem to be going very smoothly." "Everything is fine," Emma replied without looking up, "because I don't want to have to remind you of what Mr. Hale made very clear." Emma looked straight at him. "I have it under control." Richard smiled, a smile that carried no goodwill. In the office, Victor sat in front of the screen but couldn't read a single line. The child's words kept replaying in his mind. "He doesn't like smiling." He stood up and walked to the window. In the backyard, Emma was hanging laundry on the line. The two boys sat on the grass, finally calm. Lucas laughed at something Noah was drawing. Noah nudged his brother lightly, then smiled as well. Victor watched. There was something very simple there, not loud, not perfect, but real, something he hadn't touched in many years. And he didn't know whether that feeling unsettled him, or whether it was making the walls begin to crack. The afternoon moved slowly on the second floor as Emma wiped the tall, floor-to-ceiling window frames. Slanted sunlight stretched across the quiet hallway when a light knock sounded behind her. She turned. Noah stood there, his hands clasped together, his hesitant posture suggesting he was weighing something important. "Are you busy, Mom?" he asked softly. Emma set the cloth down. "If it's you, I always have time." Noah stepped closer. "I don't understand," he said after a moment. "This house is so big. Why do we always have to walk quietly?" Emma crouched to meet her son's eyes. She didn't answer right away. "Because this place doesn't belong to us," she said slowly. "We're here to work, not to live like we do at home." Noah frowned. "So, the owner doesn't want to see us?" The question made Emma pause for a brief second. "He's like someone carrying a lot of sadness," Noah continued. "I can tell." Emma couldn't find a response. She simply pulled her son into her arms and held him gently. When the workday ended, Emma was tidying up in the kitchen when she sensed someone behind her. She turned. Victor Hale. "Sorry if I startled you," he said, his voice low and brief. Emma straightened quickly. "It's all right, sir." Victor was silent for a few seconds, as if weighing his words. "The garden out back," he said at last. "The children can stay there, but only within that area." Emma blinked. "You mean it's allowed?" "As long as they keep quiet," Victor replied. "I don't want noise." He turned away before she could say anything else. Emma stood still, her hand gripping the strap of her bag. Then, very softly, she smiled, a cautious smile, but a genuine one. In the weeks that followed, the mansion began to operate on a different rhythm. Emma worked quietly as before, but no longer with that suffocating tension. Lucas and Noah played in the back garden, strictly within the permitted boundaries. And Victor, he remained in his office, kept his distance, and pretended not to notice. But he did notice. He noticed the restrained laughter beyond the windows. He noticed the faint scent of baked goods occasionally slipping into the house's sterile air. He noticed small things out of place: a toy car forgotten on the steps, a drawing left askew on a table, a brightly colored ball lying still in the hallway. Strangely enough, those things no longer bothered him. Victor Hale began to change in very small ways, but to Richard, every detail was a warning sign. Victor no longer kept his office door closed all day. He stepped out more often, lingered longer in the hallways, sometimes listening to sounds he had once gone out of his way to avoid. Richard understood exactly what that meant. Control was being threatened, and the fastest way to regain control was always the same: plant doubt. One afternoon, while Victor was reading reports in his office, Richard knocked and stepped inside. His voice was gentle, careful, as though he were merely sharing a harmless observation. "Mr. Victor," Richard said, "have you noticed that some items in the house are no longer where they used to be?" Victor looked up. "What do you mean?" Richard shrugged. "Nothing serious, just small details. A book moved from the shelf to the desk, a remote control no longer in the living room. Perhaps I'm misremembering." Victor said nothing, but in his mind a familiar sensation began to stir. "And?" he asked. Richard hesitated, as if reluctant to continue. "Children tend to be curious, energetic. I just thought it might be better to be cautious." There was no direct accusation, no conclusion, but Richard knew exactly what he was doing. From that day on, Victor began to pay closer attention. He remembered precisely where he left his pen, how he pushed his chair in, every small personal habit. And then he began to notice the discrepancies: a pen lying on the desk instead of in the drawer, a picture frame turned slightly off angle, his office chair no longer in the exact position he always left it. Small things, possibly accidental, possibly his own forgetfulness. But old memories did not allow Victor to dismiss them. The last time he told himself, "It's probably just a misunderstanding," he had lost everything. Richard continued to observe, continued to report, each time vague, careful. "I'm not sure. Perhaps I'm mistaken. I just thought you should know." And each time the doubt inside Victor grew a little more. That afternoon, as Emma was cleaning the common living area, she sensed a shift in the air. She turned just as Victor Hale entered the room, without warning. "There's something I want to address," he said, his voice even and cold. Emma stopped what she was doing. "Yes, sir." "You need to keep a closer eye on the children." The words landed lightly, but enough for her to understand the implication beneath them. "Did something happen?" Emma asked, keeping her voice steady. "No," Victor replied. "I simply don't want things to be disturbed. Everything here has its place." Emma looked up. A flicker of sadness crossed her eyes, quickly replaced by restraint. "My children know boundaries," she said slowly. I don't allow them to touch what doesn't belong to them. I'm not accusing you, Victor said. I'm setting a requirement. I've always met your requirements, Emma replied, firmer this time. Victor didn't argue. He turned and walked away, leaving behind a heavy emptiness. Emma stood still for a long time, a familiar pressure tightening in her chest. She knew this feeling all too well. When someone's gaze begins to scrutinize, the outcome is often decided long before. That night, in her small room, Emma locked the bathroom door and turned on the tap. She let the water cover the sobs she held back. The children couldn't see. They had already carried too much. A soft knock came at the door. "Mom," Noah called. "Are you okay?" Emma took a deep breath and opened the door. "I'm fine." "Did we do something wrong?" the boy asked, worry in his eyes. Emma knelt in front of her son. "No, you didn't do anything wrong." "Then why were you crying?" Emma went quiet for a second. Then she pulled both children tightly into her arms, saying nothing. Night fell, and Victor couldn't sleep. He knew he was becoming unfair, but fear had no interest in reason. Victor opened a drawer and took out a crumpled sheet of paper, a yellow sun, an awkward smile, a short line written for a quiet adult. Why, he wondered. Why would anyone care, if not for some purpose? He crumpled the paper again and threw it into the trash. Then a thought took shape. Cold, logical, and safe. A test. Reason tried to object, but fear did not. It reminded him of the past, of the price of blind trust, of the feeling of betrayal when everything had seemed safest of all. If the children truly followed the rules, if Emma truly had things under control, everything would be fine. And if not, he would know before it was too late. When Richard Moore heard the plan, the corner of his mouth curved upward. "At last you're being cautious again," he said. In Richard's mind, the ideal order had already taken form. A house clean and silent, without that woman, without those two children. And most importantly, everything returned under his control. The next morning, Victor acted. He rearranged the office deliberately. He left the door slightly open, placed the expensive watch at the center of the desk, set the antique pen beside it, and folded several bills neatly, leaving them fully exposed beneath the light. Every detail was calculated. Victor sat back into the familiar leather chair, facing the desk, arms crossed over his chest. He tilted his head back, closed his eyes, and adjusted his breathing. Slow, steady, controlled. He pretended to sleep. Emma was upstairs, cleaning the bedroom at the end of the hallway. She worked with focus, yet her mind was not entirely at ease. The children had been left in the kitchen with paper and colored pencils, just as agreed. Before leaving, she had looked at Noah a moment longer than usual. The boy had nodded slightly, a quiet promise. About 15 minutes passed in silence. Lucas began to fidget in his chair. He swung his legs against the table, eyes wandering, boredom settling in. "Noah," he whispered, "let's go look around for a bit. Mom won't know." Noah looked up from his drawing. "We shouldn't," he said softly. "Mom said to stay here." "Just to look," Lucas insisted. "We won't touch anything." Noah hesitated. He glanced toward the stairs, then down the long hallway leading to the other rooms. Finally, he stood. "Just quickly," he said. "Then we come back." The two boys left the kitchen and walked slowly down the wide hallway. Each step was placed carefully, as if they understood the house did not like being disturbed. They studied the paintings on the walls, the large plants, the thick rugs beneath their feet. Then they saw the door. Victor's office door was slightly open. Lucas stepped forward and peeked inside. "Noah," he whispered, excitement bubbling in his voice. "He's sleeping." Noah moved closer. Through the narrow opening, he saw Victor Hale sitting motionless in the leather chair, head tilted back, eyes closed. The man looked different this way, Not rigid, not intimidating, just tired. "We shouldn't go in," Noah murmured. "Just for a second," Lucas replied. "He won't know." They stepped inside, almost on their tiptoes. The room itself demanded silence. Tall bookshelves, the scent of old wood and paper, a large desk with objects glinting under the light. Lucas noticed the watch first. The polished metal caught his eye. Then the folded bills. He stopped. Noah saw them too. But what held his gaze was not what lay on the desk. It was Victor's face. Even while sleeping, the man looked sad, his brow slightly furrowed, his jaw tense, as if rest never truly reached him. "Noah," Lucas whispered, his voice unusually subdued. "He looks sad even when he's asleep." Noah nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, like no one ever made him smile. The door behind them remained open. Victor stayed perfectly still. And in that room, in the heavy silence, two children stood before a choice they did not know would change everything. Lucas was the one who broke the silence. He looked at Noah, his eyes lighting up with a thought that was both bold and innocent. "We could make him smile," Lucas whispered, his voice trembling with excitement. Noah frowned. "How?" Lucas scanned the room. Then his gaze landed on a small box resting on a side shelf near the desk. Inside were colored markers used for labeling documents, bright, vibrant. "We draw on his face," Lucas said quietly, as if sharing a great secret. Noah's eyes widened. "We can't. Mom will be mad." "Just a little," Lucas pleaded. "He's sleeping. When he wakes up and looks in the mirror, he'll smile. Then we clean it. No problem." Noah looked back at Victor Hale's face. He barely breathed. The man looked so lonely it made something ache inside Noah's chest, even though he wasn't old enough to name that feeling. "Small," Noah said softly, "and careful." Lucas smiled in victory. The boys opened the marker box gently. They chose colors as if the task before them was important beyond words. Step by step, they moved closer to Victor, their hearts pounding inside their small chests. Victor remained motionless, but inside, every one of his senses was alert. He heard the whispers, the soft click of the box opening. He felt breath nearby. His heart raced. He waited. He waited for small hands to reach for the watch, for the money to disappear, for the moment that would confirm his fears. But it never came. Instead, he felt something light brush against his forehead. Lucas began to draw. A large circle, carefully placed, at the edge of his forehead. Yellow. A sun. Noah followed, drawing a small heart on his cheek. Then tiny stars scattered around it. Lucas added a crooked smile near the corner of Victor's mouth, colored blue. The children worked in silence, focused and serious, as if carrying out a sacred mission. No laughter, no mischief, only intent. "All done," Lucas whispered at last. Noah studied their work and smiled softly. "I hope he likes it." They placed the markers back into the box, closed it carefully, then stepped back to admire their creation. The sad man now carried a sky of color on his face. Then they turned and left the room as quietly as they had entered. Victor remained seated, but inside him everything had shattered. Not a single object had been touched, not a single bill taken. Before him was the clearest proof of something he had refused to believe in: innocence. And one question echoed endlessly in Victor Hale's mind. Why? Did they want to make me smile? Victor remained still for a few seconds after the door closed. He heard the small footsteps fading away. He felt the silence return to the room, but it was no longer the same silence. He opened his eyes. The ceiling appeared above him, familiar yet suddenly distant. Victor rose slowly, his legs heavier than before, and walked toward the mirror mounted on the side wall of the office. And then he saw himself, a yellow sun on his forehead, a small heart on his cheek, tiny stars and a crooked blue smile near his mouth. The image was ridiculous, absurd, completely incompatible with the Victor Hale he thought he knew. For several seconds he simply stared. Then a laugh escaped him. At first it was quiet, as if he himself didn't believe the sound. But it grew, deeper, fuller, until Victor had to brace himself against the desk, until his eyes burned. He was laughing, truly laughing. The office door burst open. Emma stood there, breathless, her face draining of color as she took in the sight of Victor. Her gaze shifted from the colorful drawings on his face to the two boys standing behind her. Her heart sank. "Oh my God," Emma whispered. "Noah, Lucas." The boys lowered their heads. Lucas began, his voice shaking. Richard Moore appeared moments later. His eyes swept quickly over the scene before settling on Victor's face. A flicker of satisfaction crossed his features, quickly concealed. "This has gone beyond acceptable limits, Emma." The children were unsupervised and intruded into Mr. Hale's private space. "You will have to leave," Richard concluded. "There is no other option." "Mr. Hale," Richard said gravely, "this is clearly unacceptable behavior. I'm afraid—" "That's enough." Victor turned. "Victor." His voice was calm, not loud, but it cut through the room. Silence fell instantly. "Do you know what they did?" Victor asked, his gaze fixed on the children. Richard hesitated. "They drew on your face." "And did they touch anything on my desk?" Richard looked up, her voice trembling but firm. "No, sir, my children didn't take anything." Victor nodded slowly. He knelt in front of Noah and Lucas, lowering himself to their eye level. "You drew on my face? To make me smile?" Noah nodded, tears gathering. "You looked very sad, even when you were sleeping." Victor closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he opened them again, doubt no longer had a place to stand. Victor slowly lowered himself, kneeling in front of the two trembling boys. "Thank you," he said softly. The entire room fell silent. "No one has ever thought about trying to make me happy," he continued, his voice rough. "Not once." Lucas stopped crying, tears still clinging to his lashes. "So, did we do something wrong?" Victor nodded. "Yes, drawing on someone's face is not the right thing to do." Both small heads dropped immediately. Then Victor placed a hand on each of their shoulders, very gently. "But your intention was not wrong." This time he smiled. Not a polite smile, not a social one, but something softer, something real. Emma felt her knees weaken, not from fear, but from relief, as if a heavy stone had just been lifted from her chest. Victor stood up and turned to Richard Moore, who was still standing in the doorway, his irritation impossible to hide. "You may leave," Victor said calmly. "Sir." "And next time," Victor cut him off, his gaze sharpening. "If you intend to terminate someone's employment, you will let me be the one to decide." Richard froze. He seemed ready to argue, but Victor's stare stopped every word in his throat. He turned away, casting Emma a bitter glance before the door closed behind him. Victor turned back to Emma. "You are not being dismissed." Emma took a sharp breath. "Thank you. I truly thank you." "And from now on," Victor continued, "the children may use the glass garden, the game room. This house needs sound." Emma blinked, thinking she had misheard. "Are you sure?" "I am." He paused for a moment. "And call me Victor. Mr. Hale sounds like you're speaking to a stranger." Emma smiled, a real smile, fragile but full of hope. Victor turned back to the mirror once more. The drawings were still there. And for the first time in many years, the feeling rising in his chest was not anger. It was shame. In the days that followed, the house changed slowly but unmistakably. Not through luxury, but through presence. Noah and Lucas were allowed to run in the garden, to draw in the living room, to laugh without fear of being corrected. And every time Victor heard that laughter, he no longer felt irritated. He paused. He listened. Richard Moore could not tolerate the change. He attempted to plant doubt once more, but this time Victor faced the truth. Richard had never protected him. He had only protected his own control. Not long after, Victor removed Richard from his personal life entirely. Everything else unfolded naturally, without urgency. One Saturday afternoon, Victor asked Emma to stay in the back garden after the children had gone inside. "Is something wrong?" Emma asked, clearly feeling her heartbeat slip out of rhythm. Victor didn't speak right away. He looked up at the trees and took a deep breath. "I don't want to pretend anymore," he said. "I don't want to call this a job." Emma remained silent. "I know I'm not easy to live with," Victor continued. "I carry my past, my habits, and a lot of unresolved pain. But you and the children have done something I haven't been able to do for years. They make me want to wake up every morning." "Victor," Emma whispered. "Let me finish," he said quickly. "I don't love you because you're gentle. I love you because you don't bow your head, because of the way you protect your children, and because you don't need me to become someone else." Tears spilled from Emma's eyes. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't belong to your world. I'm a cleaner, a widow, a mother of two." Victor took her hand, firm but warm. "That's exactly why. I don't need to save anyone. I need someone to walk beside me, something real." Emma cried, not from pain, but because for the first time she wasn't defending herself. "I'm scared," she said. "Scared that one day you'll wake up and see that I'm not enough." Victor shook his head. "There is no enough or not enough. There's only right or wrong, and it's you." They kissed in the afternoon light, not rushed, not theatrical, a kiss between two people who had lived long enough to know what they were choosing. When they told Noah and Lucas, the reaction was immediate. "So you're going to stay with us forever?" Lucas asked, his eyes shining. Victor knelt to meet their eye level. "If you want me to." Noah said nothing. He wrapped his arms tightly around Victor. "Yes." And from that moment on, family was no longer an abstract concept. Night fell deeply. The mansion lay at rest after a long day, with only the soft sound of wind brushing past the porch and a sky full of stars stretching above. Noah and Lucas were fast asleep, their steady breathing like a promise of peace. Victor and Emma sat side by side on the porch. Neither of them spoke. The silence between them was neither heavy nor empty. It was warm, as if both understood there was no need to fill this moment with words. Emma spoke softly, her voice so gentle it seemed meant only for the night. "Are you happy?" Victor didn't answer right away. He looked up at the sky. The stars were unchanged, but he was not. "I used to think happiness was something meant for other people," he said slowly. "That I only needed to exist." He turned to her. "It turns out I was wrong. I'm very happy now." Emma looked at him. In her eyes there was no doubt, only quiet understanding. She smiled and placed her hand over his. Victor squeezed her hand gently. And in that very small, very peaceful moment, he knew. Happiness wasn't something loud. It was the feeling of no longer wanting to run away.